Imagine that you're a doctor and that your patient has just died on the operating table. Now you have the difficult task of telling the family the bad news. You're an expert in medicine, but you have no knowledge of human psychology and a very limited understanding of human emotion. How do you think that conversation is going to play out? Well, you probably already know the answer. Badly. Medical schools in Australia and the UK have come to recognize something very profound, that being an expert alone is not enough. The med school entrance exam now includes sections on poetry analysis, essay writing, and science. They want to train good doctors, but they also want to train doctors who can talk to their patients. What they're doing is something we used to do in education all the time. They are training generalists. As opposed to an expert who understands only one field of knowledge, a generalist is someone with two or more areas of knowledge that interest them. And they use that knowledge to create, to invent, and to master all of them. Now, the most famous generalist of all time was a man named Leonardo da Vinci. Now, you may know da Vinci as a great painter. He's famous for the Mona Lisa. But what you might not know is that da Vinci was also a scientist, an engineer, and a medical researcher. You might ask something like, why was da Vinci such a good painter? The reason is because he knew the science behind art. He studied the mechanics of bone structure and the science of facial expressions. And that's what makes his Mona Lisa look so real to us. You might ask a second question. Why then was he good at medical research of all things? The reason is because he knew the art behind science. Da Vinci's sketches of the human heart were so accurate that they're still compared favorably to modern imaging technology. It's 500 years later, we have the latest technology, and his sketches still hold up. See, this gets to something at the core of being a generalist. Generalists are great at taking skills from one field and applying them to another. Da Vinci took his skills from art that you know him for, and he applied those skills to biology, to geology, and to medicine. And as a result, he became one of the most prolific inventors of all time. He was one of the first people to sketch a parachute and a helicopter. So we like to think of people like that as geniuses, but my contention is that he only seems to be a genius to us because he's gone outside of one field of knowledge. So that makes him look smarter than he actually is. So why aren't we all geniuses today? Well, a lot of the blame can be placed on the university system. Since the 1970s, we've moved away from the idea of a generalist education and towards the training of experts for narrow jobs. Our education system is in what you might call a crisis of expertise. We are trained so narrowly today that we've become incapable of reaching our full potential. And you don't have to just trust my words on this. Even professors from the Ivy League admit as much. Ivy League educator Bill Deresiewicz puts it quite simply when he says, when kids go to college, they hear a speech or two that urges them to ask the big questions, and when they graduate, they hear another speech that urges them to ask the big questions. And in between, they spend 4 years taking courses that train them to answer the little questions, specialized courses taught by specialized professors aimed at specialized students. Our university degrees have become a system of specialist training, and degrees today are required for even the simplest of jobs, for photocopying documents, or writing appointments in a diary, or writing a newspaper column. There are degree requirements everywhere we look. The common argument is that you wouldn't want a doctor without training. They'll kill someone. Well, what about a PA? What about a bank teller? Do we need experts in every single job? Or should we open up those jobs so that more people from different backgrounds have access to them? Over the last 30 years, degree requirements have spread to every single industry. So it used to be the case that a high school diploma was enough to get a job in banking. Now you need a bachelor's degree. Where a bachelor's degree was enough to get a job in research, now you need a master's. Where a master's was enough to get a job tutoring at a university, now you need a PhD. In 1973, only 28% of jobs in the US required a degree. Today, that number has more than doubled. So why does it matter? Why does it matter that there are experts everywhere, all around us? What's the big deal about that? Well, a lot of the reason comes back to the definition of an expert. So let's go back to that for a minute. An expert is great at understanding their own field of knowledge. They're great at mastering technical skills. But they have a couple of blind spots. What they're not good at is understanding how their area of knowledge relates to other areas. And the second area is that because of that, they struggle with things like creativity and coming up with bold new ideas. The two are related. So let me explain the second point. As we've created more and more experts from our university systems, we've actually stopped inventing as much. You can look over the period of time as universities have boomed across the world, and what you see is that the rate of patenting new technologies has declined. We have more experts, but we're inventing less than we ever did before. Why is that? Well, part of the reason is what I've got into, that degree requirements and experience requirements have made it harder for young people to have access to these kind of creative, inventive, and innovative positions. There are barriers in the way to people these days that there never used to be. Where Einstein was most productive in his early 20s, over the last century, 93% of Nobel Prize winners were 30 and older. And that just keeps increasing. Every century it goes up by 5 or 6 years. And as universities have come about, that age gap is starting to increase. We're blocking out an entire generation from inventing anything new. But that's only part of the story. The second part is this. As experts have gone into invention, they've increasingly turned away from inventing anything new altogether and are increasingly recombining old technologies instead. People like to celebrate the smartphone, but the smartphone is actually a combination of existing technology, maps, the internet, and phones. Compare that to the light bulb, which was revolutionary in creating an entirely new industry. This is the biggest blind spot of experts. They tend to have an arrogance and an overconfidence in the existing way of doing things. And that makes them struggle when it comes to new technology a little bit. You can see it a lot of the time in Hollywood. So Hollywood used to produce dozens of original films every year. Now it mainly produces sequels. We've all seen too many comic book movies lately. The reason for that is that expert producers, armed with big data, have come up with this narrow formula for success. What the formula ignores, however, are breakthrough stories that defy expectations, the very kind of stories that we most want to see. That's what that kind of formula ignores. Our companies are making the same mistake. Companies like to think that they can hire an expert coder, psychologist, and designer, and that together that team of experts will create something new. The reality is that's not the case. A team of generalists will always outperform a team of experts when tasked with creating something new. They've done the studies on it, and they've given the same task of creating a new invention to the generalists and the experts, and the generalists come out on top every single time. The second blind spot is quite interesting. Experts struggle to understand how their area relates to other areas of knowledge. And you see this sometimes with professors who only understand their own discipline and who don't really want to go across the road to the other building and talk to someone else from a different discipline. So what happens there is that when they only understand their own area of knowledge, they start having repercussions into their own work. Let me give you an example. In 2014, Mark Zuckerberg was caught by surprise when he realized that social media platforms were not just for social media. They were also political platforms. That year, fake news and hate speech caused riots in Myanmar because of the text spread online through Facebook. In 2016, we saw the same problem prior to the US election when Russian propaganda infiltrated the platform. Zuckerberg admits something that I think we all should realize. An expert knowledge of coding is not enough to manage a social media platform. More is needed. Perhaps if our leaders were trained more broadly across many different areas of knowledge, they wouldn't fall victim so often to this kind of blind spot in their thinking. So what can we do about this? How do we go back to a time of training generalists rather than experts? I think there are three things we can do. Firstly, as institutions, our schools, universities, and workplaces can start the difficult task of moving away from training experts and towards training generalists. This will involve a radical rethink of the curriculum structure. We need to include more general knowledge, and we need to allow students and employees the chance to dabble in many different areas of knowledge across their training so that they can bring that knowledge with them into the industry that they ultimately choose. We can't keep expecting 18-year-olds to make decisions about their specialty that will affect them for the rest of their life. That's bad for business, it's bad for invention, and it's probably also bad for the 18-year-old. The second point is that our companies should start getting rid of degree requirements for jobs. Now that sounds radical, but the reason I say that is because we've so limited the candidate pool for jobs that we're getting the same kind of person every single time. What companies typically want is a diverse range of candidates with a diverse range of knowledge, because once you have that creativity, you have the technological innovation, and you have that progress within the company. Thirdly, as individuals, we can start reading widely. We don't have to limit ourselves to the specialty we chose in university. We can read across multiple different fields, and we can use that knowledge to become more broad-minded in our thinking over time. Let me conclude by admitting that experts do have a role in our economy. We need some people with a specialized knowledge of their industry, and we need people who are masters of technical skills. But experts alone are not enough. If we want to create a society of new ideas, new technologies, and new inventions, we need to start training generalists, people trained across 2 or more areas who use that knowledge to push forward towards new, daring conclusions, inventions, and technologies. Once we have escaped the boundaries of expertise, there's no telling what we can accomplish.